"We're putting you in a nursing home," my eldest grandson, Michael, announced brightly, his sister Chloe nodding beside him. They were standing in my living room, right in front of the fireplace where my late husband, Thomas, and I had hung our stockings for 40 years. My son, Mark, and daughter-in-law, Lisa, hovered behind them, wearing matching expressions of strained, performative concern. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe family should protect, not exploit each other. Hit that like button and subscribe for more. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of crisp autumn day where the leaves outside my window were a riot of reds and golds. I had baked apple pie that morning, expecting a pleasant visit. Instead, I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. This wasn't a discussion, it was a declaration. It felt like a sentence delivered by messengers too young to understand the weight of their words, but old enough to parrot the intentions of the adults standing behind them. They saw my house, my life, not as my sanctuary, but as a problem to be solved, a resource to be managed, until she realized her own family saw her as nothing more than a source of money. My name is Eleanor Vance. I was 68 years old, a widow of 2 years. Thomas and I had built this life together, brick by brick, memory by memory. Our home, a solid, 3-bedroom ranch house on a quiet street with a generous garden I adored, was paid off years ago. We had modest savings, a decent pension from Thomas's work, and my small social security. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We had planned, saved, and lived within our means. And we had always prioritized our children. Our 2 children, Sarah and Mark, had grown up in this house. We'd helped them both through college, paid for their weddings, provided down payments for their first homes, and babysat their children whenever needed. When Sarah, my daughter, went through a difficult divorce 10 years ago, she and her 2 children, Emily and Alex, lived with me and Thomas for nearly a year. We supported her emotionally and financially until she got back on her feet. When Mark and Lisa struggled to afford a larger house for their growing family, Michael and Chloe were their children. Thomas and I had given them a significant sum, dipping into our carefully built-up savings, because family helps family. That was our creed. That was the foundation of our lives. After Thomas passed, the house felt a little too big, a little too quiet, but it was mine. It was filled with him. It was familiar. I kept busy with my garden, a book club, volunteering at the local library, and visits with friends. Sarah lived 2 towns over, busy with her own life, but always kind. Mark and Lisa were closer, only 15 minutes away. They visited more often, usually bringing Michael and Chloe, especially on Sundays for dinner. It felt good to have the house filled with noise and laughter again, even if it was different without Thomas. I cherished these visits, grateful my family was near. But lately, the visits had taken on a subtle shift. There was a new undercurrent, a subtle tension that I couldn't quite place. Comments about my big house, questions about my health, and pointed remarks about how lonely I must be here. Lisa would sigh dramatically about the cost of college for the kids, and Mark would complain about work not paying enough. They weren't asking for money directly, not yet, but the hints felt heavy, like stones being placed one by stone. They seemed to forget all the help Thomas and I had already given them, the sacrifices we had made. They looked at me. I was starting to realize, not as their mother, a person who loved them deeply, but as the current occupant of an increasingly valuable asset, an asset they felt was rightfully their future inheritance. They began to see my continued presence here as an obstacle. Then came that Tuesday. "You're getting older, Mom," Mark said, stepping forward now, his voice gentle but firm, the kind of tone you use when explaining something obvious to someone slow. "This house is just too much for you. The stairs, the garden, the maintenance." "I manage perfectly well, Mark," I replied, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts to keep it steady. My heart was pounding. The pie was forgotten on the kitchen counter. "But for how long?" Lisa chimed in, her smile not reaching her eyes. It's better to be proactive, Mom. Michael and Chloe were just saying. This was it. The children, coached and prompted, delivering the ultimatum. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't about my well-being. It was about control. It was about gaining access to the value tied up in these walls, in this garden, in the life Thomas and I had built. They wanted me out, in a place they presumably thought would be easier to manage me, a place where access to my finances and assets could be negotiated more easily. The nursing home threat wasn't about care, it was about clearance. I felt a surge of something I hadn't expected, not just hurt, but a cold, clear anger. They didn't see me as their mother, they saw me as a problem holding onto their perceived inheritance. They were using my grandchildren as pawns, putting these words in their mouths, exposing them to this ugliness. It was a profound betrayal, a calculated move disguised as concern. In that moment, standing in my own living room, surrounded by the people I loved most, I realized I was a target. I need to think about this, I managed to say, needing them gone, needing silence to process the shock. Mark looked slightly annoyed, as if expecting immediate agreement. Lisa's smile tightened. There's really not much to think about, Mom. We've done a lot of research. It's the best option. Safer. Less lonely. Less lonely? They proposed isolating me completely to make me less lonely? The blatant hypocrisy was stunning. I'll consider it, I repeated, my voice stronger now, though still quiet. I needed them to leave. I needed time. They eventually left, after more forced smiles and talk of setting up tours of facilities. As the door clicked shut behind them, the silence in the house wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt heavy, filled with the echo of their words and the weight of their intentions. I walked over to the fireplace, touching the worn wood mantel. Every object in this room held a memory. How dare they suggest I leave it all behind, not for my health, but for their financial gain? My initial reaction was a mix of disbelief and profound sorrow. How could my children do this? How could they be so cruel, so calculating? I cried that night, grief not just for Thomas, but for the living death of the family I thought I had. The trust one had placed in them, the foundation of unconditional love and support, felt shattered. But beneath the hurt, something else began to stir. A flicker of indignation, then resolve. They thought I was old, frail, easily managed. They thought they could just declare my future and I would passively accept it. They had underestimated me. They had forgotten that the woman standing before them had weathered storms, raised children, buried her soulmate, and kept going. I was not a wilting flower waiting to be transplanted. I was a deeply rooted oak they were trying to chop down. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The denial was gone. Their intentions were crystal clear. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would not be going anywhere I didn't choose to go. My home was my castle, and they were laying siege. It was time to defend it. My first action was small, almost symbolic. I went to the small safe where I kept important papers, the deed to the house, Thomas's will, my will, financial statements. I double-checked the lock and put the key on a chain around my neck, tucking it under my shirt. They would not get easy access to anything. I wasn't sure what my next step would be, but I knew I needed information, and I needed protection. I needed a plan. Over the next few weeks, the pressure mounted. Mark and Lisa called daily, sometimes multiple times. They sent links to nursing home websites, glossy brochures arriving in the mail, all without me asking. They asked increasingly probing questions about my finances. How much did the pension pay? Was Thomas's life insurance all gone? How much was the house worth, really? They framed it as helping me plan for my future, but the subtext was clear. They were assessing the value of their impending acquisition. I started keeping a journal, noting every call, every visit, every pointed question or comment. The date, time, what was said, who said it. It felt strange, documenting my own children's behavior, but it also felt necessary, like building a case. I started gathering financial documents, bank statements, investment summaries, tax returns. I didn't fully understand all of it, but I knew I needed to. One afternoon, Mark called, sounding exasperated. "Mom, have you looked at those brochures? We need to decide soon. The good places have waiting lists." "Mark, I told you I'm not ready to decide anything," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. My hand, however, was shaking slightly as I held the phone. "But you're not thinking realistically," he insisted. "What happens if you fall? Or get sick? We can't drop everything to care for you. This is about being responsible." Responsible for what? Responsible for making sure they got their hands on my assets quickly and efficiently. "I am being responsible, Mark," I said firmly. "I am responsible for my own life and my own decisions." The conversation ended coldly. Later that week, Lisa showed up unannounced, bringing a casserole. While I was in the kitchen making tea, I overheard her talking on her phone in the living room, her voice low but sharp. "She's being so stubborn, David. Just refusing to cooperate. Yes, the house is probably worth at least $400,000 now. It's ridiculous, her sitting on all that equity when we're struggling. It would solve everything for us, college for the kids, maybe even that extension we need. No, she hasn't seen a doctor recently, but she's clearly slowing down. We just need to convince her it's for the best, or find a way." I froze, the teacups clattering slightly on the tray. David was Sarah's ex-husband, a man I barely knew. Why was Lisa discussing my assets and my health with him? It clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just Mark and Lisa. They were coordinating, possibly with Sarah or at least involving others. They were discussing finding a way to get control. The phrase chilled me to the bone. This wasn't just entitlement. It was planning. It was a conspiracy against me. I put the tea tray down and walked back into the living room, interrupting her call. Lisa snapped her phone shut, looking flustered. "Oh, Mom, you startled me. Who were you talking to, Lisa?" I asked, my voice flat. "Just a friend," she stammered. "Talking about school." I didn't press, but the overheard conversation was a smoking gun, concrete evidence of their true motives and their willingness to strategize behind my back. It solidified my resolve. I wasn't just dealing with misguided children, I was dealing with predators. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. One was to Sarah. I didn't tell her about the nursing home threat or Lisa's conversation. I just asked how she was, how the kids were. She seemed distant, preoccupied. When I mentioned maybe coming to visit her next month, she quickly made an excuse about being busy. It hurt, but I understood now. She was likely either involved or choosing to look the other way. The second call was to Martha Jenkins, a friend from my book club whose daughter was a lawyer. Martha had often spoken with pride about her daughter, Eleanor Vance. Attorney Jenkins was kind, sharp, and listened patiently as I recounted the events of the past few weeks, starting with the grandchildren's announcement. I brought my journal and the financial documents I had gathered. She reviewed them carefully. "Threatening to put you in a nursing home, especially without any medical necessity, and discussing your assets behind your back. This raises serious red flags for potential elder abuse and financial exploitation, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Your children do not have the legal right to make decisions about your care or your finances unless you are proven legally incapacitated, which, based on our conversation, you clearly are not. They cannot force you into a facility. They cannot force you to sell your home. Any attempts to pressure you or gain access to your assets under duress are illegal." Hearing a lawyer confirm my rights and their lack thereof was empowering. It shifted the dynamic entirely. Their threats, I now understood, were based purely on intimidation and my expected passive compliance. Attorney Jenkins explained my options. I could send them a cease and desist letter. I could explore legal protections for my assets. And, she pointed out, if their goal was the house, the simplest way to remove that motivation was to take control of the asset myself. "You have the absolute right to sell your home, move, and manage the proceeds as you see fit," she said. If the house is what they're after, removing that target can sometimes diffuse the situation. It also puts the power firmly back in your hands. Selling the house. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. This house held so much of Thomas, so many memories. But staying here, knowing it was the object of their greed and the reason for their manipulation, felt like living in a battleground. Selling it on my terms, securing the value myself, felt like the ultimate act of self-preservation and defiance. I want to sell the house, I told her, my voice steady. And I want to do it quietly. Attorney Jenkins smiled faintly. That is certainly an option. And we can put measures in place to protect the proceeds and ensure your future financial security. We discussed finding a realtor who was discreet, preparing the house, and the legal steps needed to safeguard the funds from any future claims or challenges from my children. She also advised me to update my will and power of attorney immediately, naming someone I trusted explicitly and not my children. I chose Martha Jenkins as my executor and established a durable power of attorney, naming a trusted financial advisor Attorney Jenkins recommended. It was a difficult conversation with Martha, explaining the situation, but her loyalty and willingness to help solidified the small, new support system I was building outside my immediate family. Executing the plan required stealth and patience. I told Mark and Lisa that I was considering my options regarding the house and my future, which was technically true. While they continued their subtle and not so subtle pressure tactics, I worked quietly. I met with the realtor, a kind woman named Brenda who specialized in helping seniors downsize. She understood my need for discretion. We staged the house minimally, using only my own furniture. Showings were scheduled efficiently. I packed slowly, deliberately, deciding what memories to keep and what to let go. It was emotionally taxing, sifting through a lifetime, but each box packed felt like another step towards freedom. During this time, the manipulation continued. Mark and Lisa brought up hypothetical medical issues, suggested I was becoming forgetful, conveniently forgetting things they had promised, and emphasized the burden my current life was placing on them. One evening, Mark called, sounding annoyed. "Mom, the Davidsons down the street just listed their smaller place. It would be perfect for you. Single story, less yard." "That's nice, dear," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I knew that house. It wasn't what I wanted, and more importantly, it was their suggestion, another attempt to control my decision. "Well, maybe we should go look at it," he pushed. "I'm really not interested in that one, Mark. I have my own ideas about where I might want to live." His voice hardened. "Your ideas?" "Mom, frankly, we're worried about your judgment." This was it. The gaslighting, the questioning of my competence. "My judgment is perfectly fine, Mark," I said, my voice cool and firm. "I am managing my affairs, including potentially selling this house quite capably. Perhaps more capably than you give me credit for." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I had never directly challenged their assumptions or their motives like that before. "Selling the house?" Lisa's voice, sharp and sudden, came from an extension phone. She had been listening in. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "Just exploring options," I said, giving them just enough truth to make them uneasy, but not enough to reveal my plan was already in motion. Their questions became more frantic after that call, laced with thinly veiled panic. Had I talked to a realtor? Was I serious? Who would help me? They started offering to help with paperwork, with sorting things. I politely declined, stating I had it all under control. Meanwhile, my plan moved forward. An offer came in on the house, a good one, from a lovely young couple. I accepted. The closing date was set. I found a small, secure apartment in a different town, closer to where Sarah lived, ironically, but chosen for its security features and independence, not proximity to her. I arranged for movers, discreetly. The true smoking gun, the final piece of the puzzle, arrived via an anonymous envelope in the mail a few days before closing. Inside was a printout of emails between Mark, Lisa, and yes, Sarah and her ex-husband David. They discussed obtaining a predatory loan, using my house as collateral once I was in a nursing home, forging my signature if necessary, and splitting the proceeds. They talked about how to get doctors to declare me incompetent, brainstorming potential minor health issues to exaggerate. Sarah's emails were less frequent, more hesitant, but she didn't object to the core plan. She participated in the brainstorming. It wasn't just Mark and Lisa. It was all three of them, in varying degrees, actively planning my financial ruin and forced institutionalization. David's involvement confirmed he was helping them research predatory schemes. Reading those emails, I felt a cold, hard clarity unlike anything before. There was no more room for doubt, no more hope for misunderstanding. This wasn't about care or concern. It was pure, unadulterated greed and malice. My own children were plotting to steal from me, to lock me away, to erase my autonomy for their own gain. The pain was immense, but it was tempered by a fierce, protective rage, not just for myself, but for the person Thomas had loved, for the mother I had been. They wouldn't win. On the day of the closing, I was nervous but resolute. Attorney Jenkins was with me. Mark and Lisa called repeatedly throughout the morning, wanting to know what I was doing, where I was. I didn't answer. The closing went smoothly. The check was deposited into a new, secure account that only I and my financial advisor could access, with specific instructions and safeguards put in place by Attorney Jenkins to prevent large withdrawals or transfers without multiple layers of verification. The funds from the sale of my house, the symbol of their greed, were now entirely beyond their reach. Later that afternoon, I was at my new apartment, overseeing the movers, when Mark and Lisa arrived at my old house, likely expecting to find me there alone and vulnerable, perhaps even with a U-Haul ready for the nursing home. They found the new owners instead. The young couple, confused, explained they had bought the house and closed that morning. Mark called me then, his voice a mixture of shock, fury, and disbelief. "Mom, what is going on?" "The people at the house," they said. "You sold it." "Yes, Mark," I said calmly, standing in my new, quiet living room. "I sold my house. I told you I was exploring my options. But you can't." Lisa shrieked in the background. "Where are you? What did you do with the money?" "That is no longer your concern," I said, my voice firm, setting a boundary I should have set years ago. "My finances are secure. My future is my own, and you will no longer be a part of it." I heard Mark sputter. "What? You can't do that. We're your children. We'll challenge this. We'll say you weren't competent." "You can try, Mark," I said, my voice flat. "My lawyer has all the documentation, including emails you sent discussing your plans for my assets and how to have me declared incompetent. I believe that demonstrates quite clearly who is acting in bad faith." Silence. Complete, stunned silence. They knew I had them. They knew I knew. The power had shifted entirely. Their carefully laid plans, their entitlement, their threats, they had all dissolved the moment I took control and acted decisively. The house was gone, the asset they coveted. The money was protected. Their leverage had evaporated. You can't just cut us off," Lisa finally whispered, the entitlement still there, but now tinged with desperation. "I just did," I said, and I hung up the phone. Word spread quickly among the extended family. Some were shocked, some were quietly supportive, having perhaps seen glimpses of Mark and Lisa's behavior over the years. Sarah was silent, her complicity exposed. There were attempts by some relatives to mediate, to urge reconciliation, to say, "But they're your children." I listened politely, then explained, calmly, that my children had plotted to steal from me and institutionalize me. The reality of that usually silenced them. There was no reconciliation from my side. The betrayal was too deep, the intent too malicious. Mark and Lisa hired a lawyer as they threatened, but it went nowhere. Attorney Jenkins easily refuted any claims of incompetence, presenting my meticulously kept journal, the the emails, and records showing I had handled the entire complex process of selling a house and relocating independently. Their attempts to challenge the protection of my assets failed completely. They incurred legal fees, gaining nothing. Life in my new apartment was quiet, peaceful. It was smaller, yes, but it felt safe. It was mine, truly mine, free from greedy eyes and manipulative schemes. I set up my small garden on the balcony, found a new book club, and began volunteering at a local animal shelter. I built new routines, new connections. I had lost my husband, and then, in a different way, I had lost my children. The grief for the latter was a dull ache, a scar rather than a wound. But in its place grew a quiet strength, a profound self-respect. I had protected myself. I had honored the life Thomas and I had built, not by clinging to a building, but by safeguarding the security we had worked for. The house was just a structure. My peace of mind, my autonomy, my dignity, those were invaluable. I had faced their betrayal and stood tall, securing my future on my own terms. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself.